It didn't sound like thunder. That's what Sheriff Colton Ridge kept telling himself as he stared out the dusty window of the Pine Brook. Sheriff's office, the storm had swept through the hills last night, hard and mean, one of those Tennessee tempests that rattled bones and bent trees. But the sound that stirred him from sleep wasn't thunder. It was lower, deeper, like something was trying not to be heard, and Czar knew it, too. The old German shepherd hadn't moved from the front steps since before dusk, just sat there, muscles tense, ears twitching at intervals like a ghost was breathing down his neck. Sheriff Ridge had known this dog through war and worse. 2 deployments overseas, dozens of search and rescue missions, 1 ambush. In Kandahar, they never talked about if Czar was uneasy, it meant something was wrong. Not outside beneath at 6:41 a.m., Colton found an envelope under the station door. No name, no stamp. Just a smear of rainwater and mud along the edge. He picked it up, rubbed his thumb over the paper like it might answer a question before he even opened it. Inside, 1 sentence handwritten in a shaky scrawl. The children still cry under her floor. Colton stood still for a long minute, staring at the words. A gust of wind raked the outside of the building like nails across. When he looked down, Czar hadn't blinked. Just sat staring in the direction of the Dawson Place, ears stiff, tail low. Margaret. Dawson shed, been part of Pine Brook for almost 2 decades. Ran the White Pines Home for Children, a former plantation turned into a private orphanage. Just off State Route 9, big front porch columns, garden parties in the spring, handed out shoeboxes full of toys every Christmas with the same warm smile. Folks called her Mama Dawson, said she had the kind of heart that could turn bad kids into good ones with just a hug. Colton never trusted hugs. Not the kind that came with pearls. That morning, he drove out to the Dawson property. Czar rode shotgun as always. The clouds overhead hadn't cleared. They pressed down heavy and dull like someone had poured cement into the sky and waited for it to set. Don't know what we're looking for, boy, he murmured as he rubbed the shepherd's flank, but you let me know when you find it. Czar gave a low grumble, eyes fixed ahead, not at the main house. At the barn, the gate creaked when Colton pulled up. Margaret came out wearing a peach shawl that didn't match the muddy slush on her boots. Her smile was tight. Forced. Well, this is a surprise, she said, brushing her hands on her apron. Everything all right? Storm rolled through hard. Ridge replied, tipping his hat. Wanted to check on the kids. Of course. Her voice was sweet. Tea over crushed ice. Always appreciate your visits. Sheriff. Inside the house, the children were lined up like a painting. Neat hair, clean shirts, folded hands, plates full of hot biscuits. They looked healthy, too healthy, not a bruise, not a whisper of fear. But it wasn't the kids that caught Czar's attention. He didn't look at the food, didn't glance at the laughter or the smiles. He moved with surgical focus, sniffing corners, pacing the edges like a soldier sweeping a perimeter. Then he stopped at the barn door, growled, tail stiff, nose to the wooden threshold. Colton frowned. Something you're not telling me, Margaret? She blinked. That's just a storage shed, old tools, broken rakes. Nothing safe for little feet. Mind if I take a look? Barn creaked open like it didn't want to. The inside smelled like wood oil, and rain dust sparkled in the flashlight beam as Ridge stepped inside. Czar moved ahead, weaving through hay bales until he came to a scuffed patch of floor near the rear. While he sniffed, barked once sharp, like a gavel hitting. Colton stepped over and tapped the floorboards with his boot. Hollow. Said there wasn't a basement. He said there isn't, Margaret replied to Fossar Wind, and sat by the spot, refusing to move. Colton didn't push further yet. No warrant, no probable cause, just instincts, a dog's nose, a letter with no name. He looked up. Margaret was watching him too closely back at the station. Czar paced for hours, restless. At 2:14 a.m. he stopped and stared at the window. Colton heard it, then not. The wind, not rain, whimper faint, wet, human. He stood so fast the chair clattered behind him. Next day, Pine Brook was decorated with flyers for the Dawson Spring fundraiser. Margaret's smiling face plastered on every poster. Proceeds go to feed and clothe the children. That afternoon, Colton spotted a small girl outside the feed store. 10 years old maybe, pale skin, hair dark as an oil spill. Didn't wave, didn't smile, just slipped a scrap of paper into his coat pocket and kept walking inside the diner behind a black coffee and a plate of untouched eggs. He opened the note. They take us when the train whistles. Please listen to him. He knows. No name, just that. But Colton Ridge knew. Exactly what it meant. The freight line ran past the edge of the Dawson property every Thursday night at 10:05 p.m. THAT. Night he didn't wait. He showed up at the Dawson house again, this time with a signed inspection order from the county judge Margaret. Didn't smile when he handed it to her. Didn't argue either. They walked the halls, the bedrooms, the kitchen oven, the cellar that hadn't existed the day before, nothing until. The barn Czar didn't hesitate, straight to the same spot this time. Colton brought a crowbar. The old plank groaned as it gave way beneath it, a rusted iron ring buried under straw and time. He looked at Margaret. She didn't flinch. He looked at Czar. The dog growled, low, soft, guttural, and mournful. Colton gripped the ring, and pulled. Dust rose like smoke from the floor below them. A black hole gaped open, silent, ancient breathing. The trapdoor groaned like an old wound tearing open. Sheriff Colton Ridge stepped back as the square of darkness yawned beneath his boots. Dust danced in the flashlight beam like ghosts that had waited too long to be noticed. The air was stale, not just old, tainted, rot and mildew, but underneath that, something far worse, something living, had suffered down theirs. The Czar didn't bark this time. He just stood over the opening, head bowed, ears forward, the way soldiers do when taps play in the wind. "What is this?" Margaret Dawson asked, her voice dry and thin as old newspaper. "That's what I came to find out." Colton muttered, unholstering his flashlight. He shined it downward. Wooden stairs descended into nothing. "Mom, I'm going to have to ask you to stay outside," he said firmly. Margaret didn't argue, didn't move either. Just stood there, hands folded in front of her like she was waiting for a funeral procession. Colton clicked the flashlight higher and nodded toward the Black Sea. Czar, the dog, didn't hesitate. He stepped down the steps like he had done it 100 times, body low, focused, ready. Colton followed every creak of the stairs, echoing like cannon. Fire in the silence. The basement was smaller than expected. Stone walls, a dirt floor, no windows, no ventilation. The air pressed down like a wet wool blanket. In the far corner stood a chair bolted to the floor beside it, lengths of chain their ends. Rusted and quiet, not empty, just done. Colton's stomach turned cold. "Sweet Lord," he whispered. Kneeling by the wall on the stone was a smear, brownish red, long faded but not forgotten blood. Czar sniffed the air and turned his head sharply toward the far wall. He let out a whimper, low and strained, as if calling to something no longer there. Colton backed away slowly, not in fear and fury. He clicked off the light and ascended the steps. When he emerged, Margaret was gone. So was her car. Colton didn't return to the station. Not right away. He called in backup from the state office, gave orders to keep it quiet. No press, no radio chatter, not even whispers in the diner rill. Boone, his deputy, arrived 20 minutes later. "Big man, bigger opinions, you." "Sure. You're not reading into this, boss?" Boone asked, glancing toward the barn. "This town treats Margaret like a walking miracle. She paid for the new school roof herself. There's a room under there," Colton said, voice tight with chains and blood. Boone blinked. "Damnware calling in the feds by nightfall." Pine Brook had begun to notice something wasn't right. Margaret hadn't picked up her usual order at the general store. The librarian mentioned seeing her pack books into her car like she wasn't coming back, and Eliza, the girl with the ink-black hair, hadn't shown up at school that morning. The next day, Colton returned to the Dawson house with a federal warrant and a small convoy. The place was to still. No children's laughter, no breakfast. Smells, just silence, heavy, unnatural. Inside the house had been tossed drawers, yanked out cabinets open. A single child's boot lay by the front door. Czar sniffed the air, then turned toward the pantry. Scratched taste. Second door, hidden behind shelves' hinges, rusted from the inside. Colton and Boone forced it open. Inside, huddled in the dark, were 3 children. One girl looked up. A bruise shadowed her cheek. One front tooth was missing, but she didn't cry. None of them did. Paramedics swarmed and social workers. Even Pastor Hale, who'd baptized 2 of the kids, stood speechless as they were carried out. But Czar wasn't done. He led Colton back to the barn, back to the trap door. This time the team pried open a second layer under the dirt. Wooden hatch sealed with iron nails. When they opened it, the tunnel stretched out like a wound, narrow, cold, damp. They walked it in silence, the beam of their lights flickering against stone and root. In that tunnel they found 7 more children, live barely. One was unconscious, wrapped in an old quilt that smelled of chemicals and rot. By the time the convoy from the FBI arrived, black sedans, white DHS van's agents in suits with grim faces. The sun was rising over a town that no longer knew how to look away. One agent, Rivera, approached Czar. She knelt and scratched behind his ear. He found them. She asked. Colton nodded. He doesn't stop, he said, not until he knows they're safe that night. Colton stayed at the station long past midnight. Case files, adoption paperwork, state audits, all clean, all glowing to clean. Some children were marked as transferred to out-of-state homes. Others supposedly died of illness, no death certificates. Some were never recorded at all. Czar suddenly rose from his spot by the door at 2:05 a.m. The train whistle blew, and then it hit Colton. They take us when the train whistles. The note, Eliza's note. Old rail spur behind the Dawson property hadn't been used in years, not officially, but Colton had grown up in Pine Brook. He knew the hidden trails, the back roads. He didn't waste a second. Drove out, lights off, parked behind the tree. Linitzer growled, low, nose twitching. That's when Colton saw Ida, wagon covered, moving slowly toward the tracks. Two men loading wooden crates. Each crate was labeled farm equipment, but when one shifted, something inside screamed. Colton didn't wait. He stepped out, rifle raised, hands in the air. Sheriff's office. One man ran. Czar bolted, tackled him, mid-stride, jaws locked on the man's shoulder before he could shout. The other raised his hands to late Deputy Boone, arrived seconds later, panting, cursing. Colton pried open the first crate. Inside was a child, drugged, alive. They found 6 crates in total. 3 held children. 3 were empty. Margaret Dawson was still missing. The next morning, a black envelope arrived at the station. No return address inside. A photograph, a woman's hand holding a boarding pass to Charleston, the back in delicate handwriting. And no one sees the tears of the righteous when they fall. Colton looked up. The clouds were rolling back in, not with rain, with reckoning. They weren't finished, not by a long shot. The morning air carried a different weight. It wasn't just the weather. It was something deeper, like the whole town was holding its breath. The barn was now a crime scene wrapped in yellow tape, but no ribbon could contain what had been unearthed beneath those boards. Sheriff Colton Ridge stood beside Agent Rivera from the FBI as they stared at the now exposed tunnel entrance. Federal agents swarmed like bees, photographing, documenting, whispering into radios that crackled with urgencies. Sat beside the sheriff, his eyes fixed on the far corner of the barn. He hadn't moved for nearly 20 minutes, just stared, waiting, listening. Rivera walked toward him, boots crunching over shattered floorboards. There's something else, she said. Colton followed her line of sight. Boards under her feet weren't like the others. They were clean to new wood that hadn't earned its place among. The decaboon, now pale and jittery, stepped forward, chewing hard on a toothpick. Czar's been sniffing that spot since we got here. Won't leave it. Trevor handed Colton a crowbar. Want to do the honors? Colton didn't hesitate. He wedged the bar under the fresh wood and pushed it, popped up with a sharp crunch beneath it. Another trapdoor, but this one wasn't wood. It was steel. Bolted shut, thick iron latch, no dust treasons. I let out a sound that didn't belong above ground, a mournful whine. As if he already knew what was on the other side, they unlatched the door and peeled it back. K-breath rose from the opening, cold, damp almost. Chemical, it smelled like something had tried to die and failed. A spiral staircase descended into darkness. Colton clicked on his flashlight. Go for Rivera raised an eyebrow. You sure? I've walked into Czar, stepped in beside him, tail down, silent. Descent was slow, every step groaning beneath their weight. The deeper they went, the colder it became. As if the air itself was afraid of what lay below. At the bottom, their lights revealed a chamber, 20 feet wide, stone walls. A dirt floor, tables lined the walls, metal corroded at the edges. Glass jars filled with murky fluid sat on rough wooden shelves. Some held bones, others things that shouldn't be in jars. Tiny handshell-formed eyes. Boone stepped back and nearly lost his breakfast. Sweet Jesus. Rivera covered her mouth. This isn't just a basement. It's a lab. Colton moved forward. His flashlight caught a leather-bound journal on one of the tables. He opened it. Slowly, ink faded. But legible subject. M. Age 9, high pain tolerance, muscle development. Notable subject, junior. Age 11. Respiratory failure after injection. Trial for subject. KL, no family records. Transferred to Hargrave facility. Colton's jaw tightened. Hargrave. Rivera asked, you know the name? Our town doctor, Walter Hargrave, been here 30 years. Rivera pulled out her phone. O'Run his files are barked. Once sharp they turned. He was facing the rear of the chamber where a narrower tunnel extended into blackness. Rivera looked at Colton. "You want to go in?" Colton shook his head. "Not yet." He turned to Boone. "Get every agency on the line. We're not looking at abuse anymore. This is experimentation, human trafficking disguised as science. Outside words spread fast, not officially. But Pine Brook had a way of whispering truths before they made the news. By Veen, parents were showing up at the sheriff's station, with photos, some faded, some recent. Missing sons, daughters, nieces, grandkids. "She was here," one mother sobbed. Margaret took her after the fire. Churches held vigils, schools canceled classes. The mayor asked for calm, but no one was calm because Margaret Dawson hadn't just vanished. She had disappeared with surgical precision. Colton didn't sleep. By morning, he was in his cruiser headed toward Dr. Hargrave's home 2 miles out of town. Colonial estate, big porch, ivy-choked chimney. It looked like money had lived there once, but now only secrets remained. The gate stood open, too quiet. He knocked, no answer. Tried. "The handle and locks are," he whispered. "Stay close." The living room was normal. Almost too normal. Leather chair, neat bookshelves, diplomas from Yale and Johns Hopkins, a photo of Hargrave shaking hands with a state senator. Czar growled low, ears flicked. Toward a vent Colton knelt. The smell hit him first. Chemical Routh. Pried open the grate. Taped beneath it a handwritten note. "Some knowledge requires sacrifice. Don't come looking." The house was empty, but the back shed was intelligent. Swept it an hour later and found a hidden floor panel beneath it. Vials, restraints, syringes, files, dozens of them each, labeled with initials, age. Blood type notes on pain reactions and surgical modifications. Boone couldn't speak. Red stepped out for air. Colton read one and froze. Subject: LA, age 12, vocal resistant, believed to be group leader transfer. Delayed pending buyer instructions. He whispered aloud, "Louisa Aguilar." "Eliza's full name," Rivera said. "Returning, she's still here." Colton replied, "They haven't moved her yet." Czar bolted from the shed. Rivera didn't hesitate. "Follow him." They did, through the woods behind Hargrave's property. 3 federal agents followed with flashlights and rifles. The storm rolled in again. Trees bent, rain sliced the leaves. They came to a root cellar partially hidden beneath fallen branches. Our barked, scratched. Colton and Boone yanked the door open. Inside, tied and gagged, was Eliza. Micey was weak, but conscious. Her eyes met Czar's, and she smiled. They carried her out as the rain fell harder, cold drops, heavy as nails. Eliza clutched Czar's neck and whispered something no one else heard, but the shepherd stood straighter than he had in days. Colton turned to Boone. "I want roadblocks on every highway out of this county. Hargrave's on the run, Margaret too. If they so much as step into a gas station, I want alarms ringing from Tennessee to Texas." Boone nodded. On it back at the station, Rivera and her team organized every file recovered from Hargrave's lab. "This is bigger than we thought," she said grimly, spreading a map across the desk. Read pins dotted the South, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana. "Damn da! Every one of these missing child cases is linked to Dawson or Hargrave," and this she slid over a photo. "A clinic shut down in 2019, posed as a children's research facility. Guess who sat on the board?" Colton didn't need to guess. Margaret Dawson's name was now on federal watch lists. Her face lit up news tickers from Alabama to Arkansas. But still she was gone, not underground, not missing, just somewhere else, waiting into the freight line. Still running. The photo arrived before dawn. Black and white granite showed a man in a wide-brimmed hat loading crates into a weathered rail car, and standing beside him, one hand gently resting on his sleeve, Margaret Dawson. Sheriff Colton Ridge stared at the image in silence. His fingers clenched the edge of the photo so tightly the paper curled. Deputy Boone dropped the next one on the desk with a mutter, caught by a trail cam behind Hargrave's old lot. Second images time-stamped just 2 hours later. Old Cottonwood rail yard. Colton's chest tightened. Cottonwood Day train yard, abandoned since 1992. No surveillance, no security, the perfect place to vanish with cargo no one wanted seen. "Wake up every breathing federal agent within 60 miles, he said. "We hit that yard in 20. You want me to call Nashville?" Boone asked. Colton grabbed his rifle and his hat. "No. This time we don't wait for red tape." Cottonwood looked like something out of a ghost story. 3 rusted tracks, a collapsing station house, a leaning signal tower that creaked with every gust of wind. But the rail car wasn't a ghost, it was real. Mid-tracks still connected to an old diesel engine. Rivera, Boone, Colton, and two federal agents approached from opposite sides. R moved low to the ground, tail straight, hackles up his nose, twitched wildly, body tense as a drawn wire. Then a shout, hands where I can see them. A gunshot cracked the silence. Colton dove behind a crate. As the bullet tore through the rail yard, Rivera rolled into cover, waving her agents to flank the car. Boone crouched behind a barrel, yelling they're armed. Czar didn't wait. He surged forward, straight into the rail car like he'd been born for. This moment inside chaos exploded. Two men were standing over crates. One reached for a shotgun. But Czar was faster. He launched through the air, slamming into the man's chest. The weapon skidded across the floor as the man screamed. The second tried to run. Czar didn't follow. He turned to the crate. He scratched wildly, barked in short, sharp bursts. Colton burst through the rail car door, heart hammering. Boone close behind, cover the door. Colton shouted. He rushed to the crate, tore off the light inside. Wrapped in a wool blanket, barely conscious, was a little boyno. Older than 6. Colton's throat caught it, was Noah Garrett. Missing 5 months from a church picnic in Louisiana, his photo had hung on the station wall since July. Colton scooped him. Up his hands, shaking, Rivera ran and radio pressed to her mouth. We need medics now. Outside, sirens began to howl. Flashing lights lit the trees like a second sunrise. 6 children were rescued that night, all drugged, all tagged with paper bracelets, no names. Just initials and weights in the conductor's box. Agents found shipping manifests, coded but cleary. List of buyers, destinations, prices, and one chilling column. Client approval, yes, no. Back at the station, Eliza May sat wrapped in a blanket beside the heater. She hadn't spoken much, but when Czar entered the room, her eyes lit up. She stood and walked over, sat beside him, laid her hand on his back, and whispered something only the dog could hear. Colton watched from the doorway. You ever seen a dog read people like that? He asked Rivera. She shook her head. He worked with K-9 units in 3 states, but Czar, he's not tracking scent. It's like he's tracking pain. Colton nodded. That's what he does. He hears what no one else does. By the end of the week, Pine Brook was no longer just a town. It was the epicenter of a national reckoning. News vans filled the streets. Federal agents turned the town library into a command post. Trauma counselors arrived in droves, but Margaret Dawson still missing until Kansas. A church pew, a pearl necklace, a fake name. Evelyn Trasserving tea at a women's ministry. She had slipped into another life, like changing coats, but Agent Rivera's call came through at 5:14 am. 7 o'clock. A federal convoy had her in custody. She didn't resist inquiry, just looked tired when they brought her back to Tennessee. Sheriff Colton Ridge stood behind the two-way glass. Margaret looked up, met his eyes, and smiled faintly. You've lost weight, Thomas, she said. He didn't reply. Rivera took the lead in interrogation. You'd get one chance to cooperate. One, no deals, no mercy, just truth. Margaret took a sip of water. I always thought I'd die before anyone figured it out, she said. Shows what I know. Rivera leaned forward. How long? 31 years. Why? Margaret looked past them toward the glass. Because people never look where the ground is soft outside. The entire town had gathered, not in protest, not in prayer, but in silent witness. Fathers, teachers, waitresses, children. Colton stepped out, faced the press. Margaret Dawson has been taken into federal custody, he said. She is being charged with conspiracy, trafficking, and the abuse and endangerment of minors. He paused, glanced toward the barnless town. We'll never let something like this happen again. The trial took place in Memphis, televised, nationalized. May took the stand. Wore a navy blue dress, held a small stuffed dog in her arms. She didn't look at Margaret. She looked straight at the judge. My name is Eliza May, she said, and I remember everything she told them about the darkness, about the men in gloves, about the voice above the trapdoor whispering, "Good children, stay quiet." R waited outside the courtroom. He didn't need to testify. Everyone already knew guilty. All 28 count sentencing delayed to allow charges from other states as they led. Margaret Dawson away in handcuffs. She turned to Colton. You were always too curious, Thomas. He didn't answer. But Czar? Today's single sharp bark fennel. The barn was demolished. Its place a community garden. At the center, a bronze statue of a boy reaching toward the light. Funded by donations from 6 states. On the base, the names of the 31 children rescued and one more. Czar hero. Without a voice, 6 months later, Colton and Czar visited the ribbon cutting of a new shelter. Czar Center for Healing and Rescue, a place for children who had survived trauma. Eliza wore a purple shirt that said survivor and storyteller. She knelt beside Czar and whispered in his ear. Colton asked what she said. She grinned. I told him, I'm not scared of thunder anymore. Later that week, a letter arrived, no name, just a check. $25,000 made out to Heroes for Animals. The memo, for the one who listened first. The note read, the children weren't the only ones rescued that day. Some of us were just quieter. That dog didn't just hear pain. He gave us permission to feel it. 2 years passed. Czar grew older, slower. He didn't chase leads anymore, but he still came to the station every morning, still rode in the passenger seat, still lay on the grass outside the old barn, sidewise listening. When he passed, they buried him beneath the oak tree. In the garden, children left flowers. One left a tennis ball and a note. Thank you for hearing. Colton placed a silver whistle beside the grave. Never blew it, but Czar would have heard it if ever needed again. This story was inspired by real canine heroes, the children whose voices go unheard, and the power of those who choose to listen. If this story moved you, subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more powerful stories of courage, truth, and the dogs who never stop listening. Leave a comment. Have you ever known an animal who changed your life? Hit the bell so you never miss the next hero's journey, because sometimes the ones who save us never speak a word. They just wait until someone listens.